Well, hello everyone. We are so excited to have you all here to join us for our October Neuro&D webinar, Neuro and Dance. We're super excited to introduce this month's speaker, David Leventhal.
David Leventhal is the program director and the founding teacher of Danceport PD, a program of the Mark Morris Dance Group that brings dance classes to people living with Parkinson's disease in more than 30 countries. A former dancer with MMDG and recipient of a Bessie Award, David has trained over 2,500 teaching artists worldwide and co-produced the Danceport PD at Home video series. His work bridges performance, education, and helps to expand access to the arts and improve quality of life.
We're so incredibly fortunate to be joined by such a dynamic speaker here today, so I'm going to hand it off to David from here to tell us more about his career journey and experiences. So I'll stop my screen share here, and David, let me know if you're able to share your screen.
I am. Thank you so much, Irene. Thank you, Yulan. Thank you, Anita. Thank you so much for hosting me here in this very esteemed group. I've been excited about joining you today for a number of months since Irene and I started talking about this possibility. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. I do have some slides to share, but I just wanted to start off by saying how much I think dance is a really interesting lens into the field of neuroscience. You know, when I talk to scientists who are working in this field, a lot of the scientists I know are doing basic research on like nematode worms and understanding just the very basics of neuroscience. Is actually an esteemed neuroscientist in the Boston area, Eve Marder, who does this work and is fascinated in that, but she's also fascinated in what we do because we're sort of on the other end of the spectrum where dance is a multifocal, complex activity that integrates multiple neurocircuits in the service of aesthetic goals. One of the powerful things about dance is that it integrates so many pathways, so many elements of our cognitive awareness, our physical movement execution, motor control, but also the limbic system, our feelings, our emotions. And it's a social activity. So I'm going to be framing a lot of what we're talking about today in terms of those four parameters, and then I'm going to let you figure out how those intersect with your neuroscientific interests and potentially some research. So without further ado, I'm gonna hop into some slides. We will take some breaks. I do have a little bit of movement as well to share with you. Don't worry, you don't have to have any dance experience or dance background to enjoy and participate. So without further ado, I'm gonna just bring this up for us and clear everything from my view so I can begin. Okay. So ostensibly we're using dance as a focus into neuroscience, but we're also using Parkinson's as a focus into neuroscience, and also into the power of dance. And I think sometimes when we're looking at research questions, we're looking at the why. It's helpful to understand not just a brain that is a non-challenged brain, but a brain that has specific challenges. And in Parkinson's, we're looking at a brain that has very specific challenges that we can track and mark and measure. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. So we have these two lenses, but I want to step backwards first in a very non-scientific perspective, because I think it's important to remember that in many fields, particularly in art, but also in social engagement, right? The activity itself comes first, and then the science says, okay, why? Why is this happening? What are some of the phenomena that we're seeing in this particular activity? And that is true in dance. So dance has been part of our human culture, right, as a species for millennia. This cave painting from Borneo, near Indonesia, is a is 20,000 years old. And I think it's pretty clear in this representation that people are engaged in some kind of collective dance experience. They are, by and large, moving together. They are in unison. Uh, they are connected in two places. These two people are joined in the hands, and these two people are joined in their hands. So there's some kind of social interaction that's going on here. Are they jumping? Are they in a deep knee bend? We're not exactly sure, but there does seem to be some element here of community and synchrony. And I think those two concepts are elements you're going to see threaded through what we're talking about today, and also have some very important resonance for neuroscience. One other element that I think is important here is the element of narrative. And as dance evolves through our history as humans, it really plays an important role in storytelling, particularly when written word was not available. It was a way that traditional societies passed on stories from one generation to the next. It was a way that communities celebrated, and still today celebrate, important events, weddings, coming of age festivities, etc. So the narrative part mixed with the communal and sort of synchronous part of dance. Again, we see some ancient paintings here of people dancing together. And here we have a soloist representing a very specific story from Greek mythology. So keeping all of these strands in mind, we see this in contemporary society as well. And we want to acknowledge that it's only in sort of Western medicine that we see such a distinct separation between arts and medicine, or arts and healing. In indigenous First Nation societies, dance and music are still very much part of healing rituals, of traditional healthcare, if you will. And I think this is important to remember. We're not forging something new. We're actually coming back to something that has been part of our society for millennia and is still present in many traditional societies. And so one of the things we're trying to do is bridge a scientific approach, which is the basis of Western medicine, with an artistic approach, which is universal in many, many cultures. And there's much more overlap than we might believe at first, but we also understand that embedded in the arts are healing modalities that we're only starting to understand from a scientific perspective. Okay, so Dance for PD started in 2001. It was the brainchild of Ole Westheimer. Ole was running a support group for people with Parkinson's. She was running it in partnership with her husband, who is a Parkinson's neurologist based in Brooklyn. And so she ran support groups for patients who attended who were in his clinic. And Ole had an idea that everything that dancers did in their practice, from class to rehearsal to performance, might have a deep resonance for people living with Parkinson's. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But Ole was also aware that many people with Parkinson's spent a lot of their time thinking about, kind of enveloped by, their symptoms. Parkinson's is a full spectrum, holistic condition. It affects every aspect of a person's life, not just the physical symptoms that we might be familiar with, things like tremor or rigidity or balance challenges, but also things like mood, depression, social interaction or social isolation, sleep, right? It impacts the autonomic system, so people can sometimes experience lightheadedness or constipation. And so all of these together create quite a challenging package for people to work with in their daily lives. And so support groups are often a place for people to talk about it, but Ole was aware that people wanted more. They wanted community. They wanted a place where they didn't have to think about themselves as Parkinson's patients, and they could forge perhaps a different identity for themselves. And so she came to us at the Mark Morris Dance Center and said, I've been thinking a lot about this. Would you consider piloting a dance class for people in my group? And we had just opened this new dance center here in Brooklyn, 2001, and we were very eager to open our doors to anyone in the community. We did not have necessarily a specific mission to serve people with Parkinson's or to serve people with neurodegenerative conditions, but we were interested in serving the community. And whoever was in that community was welcome to be in our center. We really wanted to offer this resource to them. So we started classes once a month. I taught the first class. My colleague John Higginbotham soon joined thereafter, and we started offering these monthly classes. And at the beginning, we had maybe 6 people, 7 people a month, very small crew. You have to remember that in 2001, we didn't have any research about dance and Parkinson's, and we didn't really have any research about exercise and Parkinson's and the neuroprotective effects of exercise. So we now have a lot more research than we did then. But at this time, there were many neurologists who actually counterindicated exercise and physical activity for their patients. They thought it was dangerous. They felt like exercise was going to lead to falls, and falls are probably the most dangerous, most acute symptom or outcome of living with Parkinson's. And so it was really, I think, a pioneering moment here for Oli to say, actually, we shouldn't be sitting and talking. We should be dancing. We should be moving. We should be engaging our brains in different ways than we might in a support group. Oli's idea took root, not just in Brooklyn, not just in New York City, but around the world. I was, at the time, a professional dancer with Mark Morris's company. And so, along with my colleague John, we started sharing this class wherever we traveled. So if you know something about the life of a touring artist, basically you show up, you rehearse in the theater, you do your show, and then you move on to the next theater and you do that on and on and on. And so what we would try to do is add, right before we went to the theater, add an hour where we would offer a Dance for Parkinson's class in communities wherever we were. And what started to happen was people really loved the class. They felt the improvements right away, and they asked us when the next class was. And they said, well, we don't work here. We work in New York. We're here just once every few years. And we started to think that we should be working and training with training other teachers to do this work. So that's really how the network of our program started to grow from our Brooklyn hub here, which got bigger and bigger, but also internationally. And so in 2006, we offered our first training in the UK, and then we started to offer trainings all over the world. And we now offer online training for people who are not able to get to an in-person location. So this is a network now of about 30 countries and about 500 programs. I should mention that they're all based on the same principles, artistic principles and neuroscientific principles that are the foundation of our work in Brooklyn. However, each of these programs has its own cultural relevance and cultural specificity. So what we're very mindful of is not replicating the content that we do in New York to other places. That doesn't work. Every class needs to reflect the people in that class. And so whether they're in Lima or in Sydney or in Pune in India or in Beijing, those classes reflect the music and the cultural specificity of where those classes are happening. What's consistent throughout this network is the model, the sort of lesson plan, if you will, the sequence of events in a class, how it's structured, the elements that we prioritize. But whereas we in New York might do some tap dance or ballet as our warm-up, and then a big Broadway style number at the end for big amplitude movements. The class in Pune, India, they're going to start with a Kathak based warm-up. Kathak is a classical Indian form, very rhythmic, percussive, using the feet and the voice and the hands. And then for their big movement across the floor, they might pay tribute to a Bollywood choreographer. So bringing in, again, the same big amplitude movement, but in a very different style. All right. Before I go on, I want to kind of introduce you to the class so you can kind of see just little snippets of some of the dynamics of what happens here, and also to hear from participants and one neurologist about some of the benefits of the class. So we're kind of keeping that in our mind's eye as we go forward into our conversation.
The motivation for starting a dance class for people with Parkinson's came from the desire to help people remember who they are is still the most important component of their existence, not Parkinson's.
At first didn't want to do it because I thought I'd be associated with a lot of people on the stage of Parkinson's that I didn't want to be at, and that would be discouraging to me. But I finally went, and I've never regretted the decision that I made.
Medicines can't always do as much as we want, so I've been recommending people for years and years to take Dance for PD.
I see transformation happen in front of my eyes. So people often come into the class with a lot of rigidity, and suddenly in that space, they come alive.
My hands are so stiff I can't straighten my hand out. You know, just start moving gently and all of that stiffness goes away.
There is something magical that takes place in there. I'm not sitting there thinking about my body. I'm just trying to move.
I hear from my patients when they come back how much it seems to support and sustain them emotionally.
I look to the rest of the group for inspiration. We are there for moral, spiritual, emotional support.
When I came in, I really didn't even have a chance to be skeptical because the group immediately embraces you.
It's a time when you connect, and you don't have to be embarrassed because everybody else has a problem too.
Gives people the courage to leave their apartments and go somewhere else and have a different kind of experience than they do when they're alone, which ends up being a lot of the time.
When someone shakes hands with someone who can hardly hold their hand up, they're honoring the humanness of the individual. The feeling I get from being in this group is a feeling that it's going to be hard to replace with any other activity. So I hope it lasts as long as I do.
No matter what stage you are or what your previous experience has been with exercise or movement, you belong here.
Come try it once, do a few moves, enjoy the music, enjoy the sense of community. You're going to want to come back.
All right. So one of the things we talk a lot about in the program is moving like a dancer, but more than that, thinking like a dancer, because all dance really is first and foremost a mental activity, right? It's the brain initiating movement, initiating the narrative, the imagery, the source, integrating music, integrating sense of space and spatial awareness, integrating social connection, all of that happening together. It's quite a complex activity. But I want to go back to really the inspiration for one of the inspirations for the neuroscience of this program. And one quote here, which is that I think in the arts we tend to focus on like the outcome, the product, right? The performance, the concert, the album release, whatever it is, the thing that is in the world. But there's so much process involved in creating that. And a lot of that is a neuroscientific process, right? From an artist perspective, what an artist is trying to do, whether they're a performer or a creator, a composer or filmmaker, they're trying to elicit a certain response in the audience. So it's our brains as performers trying to manipulate or influence the brains of the audience. And sometimes we know how to do this really well. I think music is a great example of this, where music has and musicians and composers have really learned their craft in a way that they know how to build anticipation. They know how to build release. They know how to create tension. All of those elements are neuroscientific principles, things that our brain anticipates, certain neurotransmitters that are released or built up in response to certain stimuli. So I think the process here is really interesting, and that's essentially what Oli was asking us to do as teaching artists, to think about the process we use as dancers and to translate that and make it accessible for people living with Parkinson's. Now, one of the inspirations for this was a 19th century German physicist and physician, he was both, named von Helmholtz. And Ludwig von Helmholtz did a lot of work on visual perception, sort of how the brain interprets information in the world around. And one of the things he was aware of is when we fix our gaze from one point to another point, we don't get dizzy, we don't get disoriented. Why is that? Well, we actually have a way of filtering out everything in between, right? We don't scan like a heavy duty scanner. We don't scan every little bit of data in between. We're able to train our brain to look from one point to the next and really focus on those things. And that's probably evolutionary. Yeah, if we scanned everything, we would be attacked by the saber-toothed tiger. So we're able to edit things. And Oli and her husband Yvonne compared this very closely to what dancers do when they turn. So when a dancer turns, we spot one place in front of us, and then as we move around, we try to come back to that spot, right? So spot to spot, as opposed to turning and looking at everything in our path. If we did that, we would get extremely dizzy. Our brains would get really disoriented. But when you spot and look at only one point, we're able to stay on balance and execute multiple turns. I'm going to give you an example of this neuroscientific principle in practice with one of the great dancers, Mikhail Baryshnikov. So here he is. This is from the film White Nights. And you're going to see, just watch his focus, watch his head as he turns around. You see his face every time because he's really using that technique. There's Gregory Hines saying, wow, right? He's using that technique, let's watch one more time, to tell his brain just one bit of information, which is look front, right? And if you look front, you know exactly where you want to finish. Okay, so taking this principle that basically every approach to dance, every technical aspect of dance is based on a neuroscientific principle, we are then going to kind of unearth some other things. And these are all elements that we use in our classes to help support our dancers living with Parkinson's who, because of Parkinson's, have more challenges executing movement, initiating movement, right? In a Parkinson's brain, there is damage to a part of the brain called the substantia nigra, which is inside the structure of the basal ganglia. So as you know, as neuroscience folks, this is responsible for a number of things, including motor control, kind of resuscitating or recalling movement patterns that are automatic, and also integrating rhythm. So when the substantia nigra stops producing the same level of dopamine that it did, at a certain level, when 70% of those cells, those dopamine-producing cells, are dead, we start to see some of the motor symptoms of Parkinson's: tremor, rigidity, balance challenges, as well as some of the non-motor symptoms we talked about earlier. Now, this is important because it means that when someone is diagnosed, they've already lost a lot of the part of the brain that actually produces dopamine. So we can't replace that yet, but we can find some detours. We can find some detours, some other pathways. And these four elements, these four elements of focus can help people grab onto some of the detours that are helpful to initiate movement and to sustain movement. So one of those is using imagery and imagination, right? Instead of giving automatic mechanical goals, like just walk across the floor, we will give an image. Walk across the floor as if you are stepping on sand or as if you are sliding across an ice rink. So there's a very specific image which then starts to integrate different parts of the brain. And that's really important, again, because the automaticity, the automatic motor aspects are not always available to people. So we need to trigger other elements that are not automatic, that they're very conscious and aware, and they're integrating these very mindfully. All right, so imagery and imagination in the service of movement. Number two, motor planning. This is also something that starts to go away with Parkinson's. Motor planning and executive function are impacted. And in dance, of course, we are often choreographing our movements. We're thinking about what we're going to do in the future. I'm going to take a step here, I'm going to take a step there. And so we have a roadmap for movement. For folks with Parkinson's, that is a welcome element of the class because often they don't have a roadmap. They are not sure how they're going to take the next step. And so by creating short sequences of movement and when possible, adding a story, a narrative to that sequence, a motivation for doing that sequence, we're providing people a template for movement. Even when we improvise, we're providing things like music, objectives, prompts that can be very helpful in, again, working around creating a detour around the lack of automaticity in our movements. All right, number three, music. Music is a huge one. It deserves its own presentation or series of presentations. But essentially, we use music as a coach, as a guide, as a teacher. Music not only tells us when to move, right, with our rhythmic structure, it tells us how to move. What is the emotional tone of this music? What is the quality of this music? How might it inform the quality of movement that I'm using? Is the movement is the music sharp, staccato, in which case I'm going to move with that approach? Or is it legato? Is it soft and continuous, in which case that's going to inform how I move? So it's the when, the how, the why, the where, might even tell me what direction to go. There's also an emotional content to music. Music makes us feel a certain way, and that can be a source of inspiration for dancers and singers and musicians and everyone, right? I'm sure all of you have found at some point being moved by music. Whether or not you're moving or not, there's an emotional content to that. And sometimes you might even find yourself tapping your foot. Number four, thinking about the performance aspect of dance. So dancers project and perform their movements, thinking about that audience. And I think that's important, particularly in Parkinson's, when movement tends to become smaller, more confined. The Parkinson's kinesphere is much smaller than a trained dancer's kinesphere. So a lot of what we're trying to do is get people to move out of their bubble into space with much more amplitude than they might in everyday life. And maybe even to apply that then to everyday life in their conversations, in their projection through the world. I talk about Parkinson's as an anti-theatrical condition because it starts to take away facial expression, voice, and big movements, all the things we need to express ourselves. So dance and other art forms can help train people to bring that back in. All right, so I talked earlier about exercise, a growing field of research on exercise and Parkinson's. The benefits of exercise are undoubted at this point. But what about dance? Dance is a form of exercise. So some people use dance to get their exercise, but there are some important layers within dance that sort of expand on what's happening in an exercise intervention. Here's an example, right? Somebody on a treadmill taking a series of steps. What is the movement pattern of that person? Oh, it's pretty basic, right? Right, left, right, left, right, left for 30 minutes. Maybe the speed will increase or decrease. Maybe the pitch will increase or decrease. But basically, the movement pattern is very consistent and not very sophisticated, right? There might be music involved, but it's essentially to distract, to distract from the boredom, the tedium of this particular exercise. And maybe this person's even watching a screen to take their mind off of what they're doing. All right, let's compare that to Gene Kelly here in Singing in the Rain. So he is also taking steps, but his steps have a lot more variety to them. He is traveling forward, sideways, backwards. He's turning. He's using different parts of his foot. He's speeding up and slowing down, just like the person on the treadmill, but he's also creating a rhythmic expression with his dancing, with his moving. He's got taps on his feet, so there's also a percussive aspect of what he's doing. He's also telling a story, right? He's telling a story of joy. He's telling us why he's happy. He's singing in the rain. He's dancing in the rain, and he is also engaging complex choreographic pattern. So his brain has to execute lots of different activities within a short term versus the treadmill walker who's basically doing one pattern for that time. So I thought we would do a little experiment for ourselves, and I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. And I'm going to invite us to take a little stretch, because we've been sitting for a while now. And for our stretch, I want us just to move our wrists a little bit. So just be aware, don't have to push anything, force anything, but just getting your hands moving a little bit. Maybe you've been typing today or sending messages on your phone. Great. And then maybe some rotations, just opening and closing, getting a little bit of mobility in there. Yeah. Great. Excellent. All right. Give me 1 second. And then let's take a little isometric movement here. So actually just pushing your hands together, using muscles to create some pressure. Keep breathing through this. And then release. And then take a stretch. And maybe a stretch forward. And maybe a stretch down to the floor. And now lifting up. Good. And coming back to our isometric movement. Okay, and just relaxing. All right, so I kind of talked you through a series of stretches, a series of movements. Would anyone call that dance? I don't think so. What was missing? What were some of the things that were missing? Well, let's look first of all at that first Think Like a Dancer prompt, which is imagery. Let's think about an image here. Let's think about this image. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right. What does this image have to do with that movement? Well, what if we apply that idea of dolphins diving into that stretch movement we just did? So I not only have the arc of that movement, I only have a little bit of a plan, right? I know the shape of that dive. I know maybe the quality of that dive. Yeah. And now what if, instead of just flipping our hands, what if I invited you to offer a gift to somebody you see? Yeah. Or maybe maybe it's your birthday today and you're receiving a gift. Thank you. And then as you give or receive a gift, a little expression of gratitude. So don't worry about pressing here, but just find a moment where you're grateful. You can take a little bow there if you want. And what if, instead of that big stretch we had, what if I thought about that as being on stage. Like, I'm going to show you an image here to help prompt you. Here's that stage. And so I want you to think about reaching your hands with intent to that top balcony, to one of the middle balconies, down to the orchestra, and then you're going to send joy to everybody and come back to that gratitude. So really thinking about projecting your movements, right, onto to an audience in front of you. All right. So we've worked in some imagery. Now let's think about that choreographic idea. Let's think about our movement as a sentence. So we're going to start to put that together. So I have one dive and another dive. And then I'm going to offer my gift and I come back. Now, just like composers and musicians, dancers think in phrases, right? A phrase of materials, like a sentence. So our first sentence might go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now my brain is saying that is starting to make some logic. That is starting to create a little bit of a flow. So I'm not doing these disparate moves, but now I have a little bit of a narrative. I don't know what that story is saying necessarily at this point. I have some images to work with. That doesn't matter, right? You can all create your own story to that. But I now have a sequence. I have a flow. And I'm also going to integrate something that choreographers and musicians and composers use a lot of, which is repetition. I'm going to do that again. Now I have my second part, and I'm going to put this together. So I have my high, middle, low, and then my shimmy, and my bow to finish. Yes. So those are my two phrases. I now have a through line, a logic, all the same material that we had before, but now it starts to feel like a dance. It has imagery. It has phrasing. I'm projecting my movements. Now I'm missing the glue. I'm missing the thing that holds it all together. And for this, the glue is music, right? So I'm going to put a little bit of music on. And this is the original music for this movement, which is a piece by Mark Morris. The piece is called Falling Downstairs. The piece has nothing to do with Parkinson's. The piece is a reflection of the very first notes of this cello suite by Johann Sebastian Bach. And it's not this movement, but the first movement goes like this. And Mark said, "Oh, that sounds a lot like people falling down a staircase." So that became the title of the piece. So another way that imagery starts to come in, and of course the piece has a flight of stairs in it. So the first thing that happens is the dancers run down the stairs and fall on the floor. What about the audience's brains as they see that? Element of surprise, element perhaps of fear, element of anticipation. What's next, right? All right, but we're going to go into another movement here, and this is from the bourrée, and you'll start to see how the movement syncs beautifully with this music here. Ready? Let me just put this onto computer so you can hear it. All right, here we go. Yeah, good. Let's try that one more time. I'm going to put it a little louder. And now we're going to do it with a repeat. So we'll do that and then repeat it one more time. All right. Imagine you're singing with your body. Let's repeat. Dum, ba-da-dum, dum. Good. Going high, middle, low, all the way up. Good. Yeah. Great. So I think you can see, even in you can't see your brain, but you can start to feel everything start to work together there, right? The imagery that we had, the phrasing, the projection, and the music tying everything together, right? This sort of magical force that integrates parts of our brain that don't normally work together. And that is the power of music, whether we're listening to it or moving to it. And one of the gifts of a choreographer, particularly Mark, who's very musical, is to make sure that the music and the movement are aligned, right? So in this way, yes, there is rhythmic entrainment, but also a sense of phrasing and weight. Da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-yum, ba-da-da, right? It's not bum, ba-da-dum, yum, ba-da. So we really can start to interact with the qualities of movement. That is so important for folks with Parkinson's who often have quite a narrow range of movement qualities. It's quite a limited palette. And so in dance, they can start to expand their range because they are starting to approach their movement really mindfully, integrating all of these things. Again, they can't lean into some of the automatic movements so much. So the act of learning choreography is a very helpful way for them to start to get back into feeling in control with their movements. All right, so moving on here, I'm going to come back to our screen. Okay. So I think it's clear that the physical elements of dance are critically important, particularly as we are talking about a movement disorder like Parkinson's. So things like amplitude, balance, certain specific motor skills like turning, shifting weight, walking, coordination. Intention is really important because often in Parkinson's we see not just a bradykinesia, which is a slowing down of movement, but an akinesia, an absence of movement, an inability for the brain to initiate that first step, right? So dance, because it has a plan, it has a strong impulse, a strong external cue, can be very helpful in helping people initiate that first step. We have a couple of tricks that we use as well. For example, traveling and shifting weight side to side before we go to the front. Using a really strong beat can be very helpful to help assist people as they entrain their movements to what they're hearing. So a synchronization between the auditory cortex and the motor cortex, also known as rhythmic auditory stimulation. So I think the motor aspects are really clear. And we start to see in some of the research on dance and Parkinson's, some of these benefits really measurable. There are now more than 50 peer-reviewed studies on dance and Parkinson's, and a number of them are focused on the motor skills, particularly things like gait, tremor, rigidity, mobility, functional mobility as it's called. Balance is a big one. Partly because balance is not well addressed through pharmaceutical or surgical interventions. So balance is really about training, and that training comes through physical therapy and it comes through dance, because all dance forms integrate some element of balance in them and balance training. All right, so those are the big motor scores there. And let's look a little bit more at this so we just imprint it. Balance, gait, and endurance. These are a lot of the physical benefits of dance, and they're captured in something called the UPDRS-3, which is the motor scale of the testing template that a neurologist will use at a neurological checkup for someone with Parkinson's. So what we've seen in some of the research is actually reduced motor impairment on the UPDRS as a result of a weekly dance class. And that's pretty significant. We were not expecting those results. We figured that we would see good results in quality of life, sense of self-efficacy, mood, all of those things that you imagine from a dance class. But actually, we saw some significant improvements in those motor scales. And that means that there are actually changes happening in the brain. We don't know exactly what's happening. We're actually doing a research project right now with a researcher at Rockefeller University to use fMRI to try to understand what is actually happening in the brain that is causing these improvements in motor scale. So that's something we want to know more about. Maybe one of you will be interested in doing that research. This was a study that was done in Toronto over 3 years. I want to emphasize it is a preliminary study. It was a relatively small cohort. However, this group was studied over 3 years, and they looked at symptom progression and compared it to a control group. And what they found was that the dancing group had slower symptom progression than the control group. That's pretty important because there's very little in the medical or surgical world that is disease altering, i.e. it changes the progression of the disease. But dance and exercise seem to actually be able to slow progression. They can't stop it yet, but they can slow it. And that's important when you're talking about a chronic condition like Parkinson's, which someone can live with for 10, 15, 20 years, to be able to squeeze out better quality of life and better motor skills for longer is a big outcome. And I want to look a little bit more closely at this in a little bit of an element of class that is about walking. So again, we build in a lot of elements of dance in the class. Walking is part of many dance styles. Those of you who know about Argentine tango is all walking. It's basically a pattern of walking and shifting and gentle turns and all of that done with a partner. This is a piece by Mark Morris called Allegro, Il Penseroso e il Moderato, and it is a 2-hour long work, but it does feature a beautiful walking dance. And I wanted to show you this because you can start to see some of the rhythmic patterning and entrainment that happen in a dance environment that could be very, very helpful and useful for people with Parkinson's. Kind of like a conga line. Everybody's dancing or walking together, a very clear rhythm, and also a very clear floor pattern, right? We're creating these beautiful lines. All right, so from the beginning, we've integrated a lot of walking, rhythmic, musical, creative walking into our class because it is one of the elements that starts to be most challenging for people with Parkinson's. And in being one of those most common and challenging elements, it can be quite limiting. It can limit people's ability to be self-sufficient, to go out, to feel confident, to visit their grandkids, to go to a concert, to be out on the street. So we feel a responsibility to really work on that skill in class so that we're maintaining that skill, giving people some strategies and tools they can use as they navigate the world. And we understand that people really are taking elements of the class into their daily lives. Here was a project we did where we asked people, how do you feel about the class? How do you take stuff into daily life? And about 67% of folks here brought some element of the class into their daily lives. A lot of those elements related to music and rhythm. About 70% use music and rhythm, whether listening to music as they're walking or using music as a coach or a guide in navigating challenges. And so we wanted to really bring as much walking into the class as we could. Here's a little interview or a short segment from a BBC piece that really examines how the class impacts steady, consistent walking.
There have been measurable changes in balance and stability. It's very noticeable, actually, in quite a few people. For example, John, when he was walking across the floor right at the end of class to get his stick, and he was walking quite jauntily, quite normally, without stuttering or stumbling at all, which he sometimes does.
I can now walk and I can sing quietly, inwardly. Nelly the elephant packed the trunk to the circus, trumpety-trump. And you walk to that and you can find it easier to walk. So if I'm in a difficult situation, that's what I do.
See, Jane's walking off in rhythm, so she's still got the time and that tempo from the dancing in her head to actually help her move out. It's great to see that.
I've taken charge of my own life now. I'm aware that I'm limited and restricted in what I do, but I want to improve the quality of my life the best way I can.
I love that segment because it really creates a bridge between the confidence that comes from the motor skills to this sense of self-efficacy, right? Being able to do other things, having confidence to go out into the world and do your activities of daily living. So, but I also want to be aware that there is sort of what we call the Parkinson's iceberg. The symptoms, the physical symptoms, the motor symptoms, things that we see, that people wear on their bodies. These often mask a lot of symptoms that we don't see. Things like sleep challenges, depression, anxiety, autonomic challenges that we talked about earlier. So we're interested in as well in dance's impact on cognitive skill. And what we see in some of the research on this is through dance, better executive and visual spatial function, and improvements in executive function and episodic memory. Now, this is not surprising. Again, we talked earlier that the art kind of comes first. People are doing these activities, and then we want to understand what are the benefits, what's happening here. Well, dance is all about episodic memory. It's learning movement, it's learning phrases. If you're improvising, it's all about executive function. You have to make decisions constantly about your speed, your direction, your rhythm. And so it really is engaging parts of the brain that might otherwise be challenged in Parkinson's. And so it's keeping those areas engaged and activated. We need more research in this area, but we're starting to see some of the benefits here. In a famous landmark study from, I think it's 2006, Verghese in New York, working in New York, did a study on older adults in general, not specifically people with Parkinson's, and dance on a number of activities that offset or delayed dementia. Dance was well and above the most effective modality for offsetting dementia, more than golf, more than tennis, more than crossword puzzles, more than reading. And I think it is that element of patterning, sequence recognition, and also physicalizing those elements. So it's not just thinking, it's also doing. Third, and certainly not least here, social emotional benefits. Reduced feelings of anger and frustration, improved quality of life, improved self-efficacy. I think you saw that in the film there, although this has also been measured in broader studies, and reduced social isolation. And this is huge because people often feel quite isolated, quite alone in their Parkinson's diagnosis. It can be difficult and awkward for them to go out into the world. They don't know if they go out, if they're going to be able to get back, or if they're going to freeze and not be able to move, or if people misinterpret their physical body language as something other than Parkinson's. Often people are mistaken for being drunk when they're actually just manifesting symptoms. And finally, reduced symptoms of depression. And this is a huge one because depression is present in approximately 50% of people living with Parkinson's at some point in their diagnosis. And we thought originally that this might just be a reported measure, that people felt the joy in class and they reported less depression. But a recent study by the same team in Toronto looked at community-based dance activity, Dance for PD class, over 8 months, and they looked at not just self-reported depression scores, but they actually looked at blood oxygen level signals in the subcallosal cingulate gyrus. And this is important because this is a part of the brain that is overstimulated in depression. And what they saw was a reduced blood oxygen level being sent to that part of the brain. So less stimulation, therefore a reduction of some of the depression symptoms related to depression. What's important about this is it is a parallel study. It's looking not just at reporting, right, how somebody feels on a survey, but actually looking at brain imagery and looking at how an activity like dance can actually impact blood oxygen levels in parts of the brain, and in this case, a deactivation of the subcallosal cingulate gyrus. So interesting work there being done by Joe D'Souza and his lab at York University in Toronto. All right, I think it's important to note as we wrap up here that everybody comes to class for different reasons. So whatever the research is saying, that's important for us to know. And it's important for the medical community to know, and of course the scientific community. But everybody living with Parkinson's who comes to a class, they all have a different agenda. They all have different symptoms. They all have different objectives. And some people do come for the social sense of belonging, social interaction. Some people come for the physical skills that it gives them. Some come for that sense of joy, the counteracting depression. So I think it's important to note that dance is a full, broad spectrum activity. It is something that can satisfy a number of challenges and a number of needs at any one time. And in that way, we're kind of wrapping up here as we started. It is a beautiful integration of these four pathways. I'm using dance terms. You can all think of this in terms of neuroscience terms, but the physical, the motor elements of dance, the cognitive elements, thinking through movement, sequencing, mirroring, integrating imagery and music, right? The expressive, emotional, limbic engagement. How does this make me feel? What do I want to express? What have I been bottling up that I now can release in a dance environment? And finally, the social. And I think the social, if we go back to our evolution in this, the social is what ties everything together. So socially, we use what we call socially motivated cues to help people initiate movement. So instead of just saying, lift your arm, I might say, reach for somebody across the circle, right? Wave to somebody over there, point to somebody over there. And that's really, again, gives people a roadmap, a motivation to move out of their bubble, to move out of an akinetic state, and to start to engage with the room around them. And again, that sense of moving in community, moving synchronously in community, has some really important resonances that go back to how our brains are wired, right? That idea of entraining to others, following others, being in tune and in rhythm with other bodies is a fundamental part of how we are designed, how our brains are designed. All right. I'm going to do one more kind of example because I think this example integrates a lot of elements of what I was just talking about. And this is something that we often do in class. I mentioned that we often will finish class in sort of a big amplitude Broadway style dance. So we're going to do a little ode here to West Side Story. And before I do that, I'm going to change my batteries. Give me one. This is, again, something that you can just follow along, whether you've danced for 20 years or never danced before. So we're going to, but what I'm hoping to do here is really show you how we integrate the different elements that we just talked about, the physical, the cognitive, the expressive, and the social. Now the social on Zoom is a little less emphatic, but we just have to imagine that we're dancing with each other. And as I'm pointing to you, you're pointing to me. So this is a little tribute to West Side Story, the rumble in West Side Story. The music is cool from that show. And this is all about power. It's all about kind of a physical presence and kind of showing off your physical ability. if you think about that number, cool. Everybody's kind of they're blowing off energy. There's a lot of steam, a lot of anger and tension that's built up. So we're kind of using that. And we're going to start by pointing at somebody. Perhaps if you're a jet, you're pointing at the sharks and trying to intimidate them a little bit. Then we're going to take a little side step. So just stepping in place. I wear different colored socks because it's easier for people to figure out what foot is going where. It's very intentional. I didn't just grab whatever was lying around. Yep. So we have our side-to-side step. Then we have our what we call splat walks. Now in class, we often do this standing, right? But I don't know how much space you have. So you're welcome to do it seated or standing. Then we're going to expand and we're going to retreat. You're trying to make yourself seem really big and intimidating. And then you're still a little nervous about going into this brawl, right? Then we're going to expand and find a pose. And here you can choose any shape you want, something that's big, dramatic, and out there. You'll hear it in the music. All right, let's try this all together. Just follow along, start to get into the mood of it. And again, think about, no, don't think about it. Just experience it. The integration of those elements that we talked about. All right, here we go. Starting with our points, really directing your energy. Here we go. Think about different levels. Maybe there's someone down there, someone up there. Side to side. Step together. Step together. Good. Step together. Beautiful. All right, let's take our splat walks. Stepping to the music. Nice. Play it cool. Shift your weight. Beautiful. Expanding up. As big as you can, and then deflating. Inflating. As big as you can. Softening. All right, now we're going to inflate. 2, 3, 4, pow! That's our pattern. So again, inflate. 2, 3, 4, new shape. Good. You don't have to think of the shape ahead of time. Just let it come out, whatever it is. Good. And 1, 2, 3, 4, pow! Good. Let's point. A little faster now. Boom, boom. Really see with your eyes. It's Von Helmholtz in action. We're going to step a little faster. Good. All right, ready for our splat walks? Here we go. And keep that going. All right, ready to expand. And soften. Grow. Oh, yes. And retreat. Good. Now we 1, 2, 3, 4. Pow. Good. Again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pow. One more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pow. And just finishing with our points. All right. You have one more big final pose. Think about what you want that to be. And here it comes. Bah! Yes. All right, I think we got a show to do. After this session, we're gonna do a little show together. You're all hired. All right, fantastic. Good. So I think you started to see again the integration of those elements. Now imagine you have two groups of dancers in our class facing each other. Some are seated, some are standing, some are holding on to a walker. They're facing each other, and all that pointing is to each other, right? So they're telling this story. They're engaged. Their brains are engaged in this very strong, powerful social moment, right? They're moving together. There's also structured dance and improvisation all together. So there are sequences they have to learn, but then there are moments where they're making up their own poses. They're making up their own direction. So there's both free agency and also a little bit of a script. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I just want to show you one more video because I think it's kind of a beautiful way to sort of wrap up what we're talking about here, and then we'll go over to questions. This is a little excerpt from a film called Capturing Grace, which is a documentary about our group in Brooklyn as they were preparing for their first public performance. And a lot of what we talk about and investigate is the group dancing experience, which is one reason I love this clip, which is a woman alone at home in her living room talking about how dance makes her feel and how dance can sometimes be available to her even when other movement is not. So a short clip, and then we will switch over to some questions. The director of this film is named Dave Iverson. He's actually he's a journalist, filmmaker, but also somebody living with Parkinson's. So this was a very personal film for him, and we're grateful to him for allowing us to share it with you.
I've learned to value myself more, which is quite a gift. When I'm slumping, I say to myself, I'm a dancer. I have to sit up straight. I am a dancer. And it gives me motivation to take better care of myself. When the medicine is working, I can almost do everything. It's just that the amounts of time get shorter and shorter when it functions. Parkinson's forces you to reveal your vulnerabilities. You know, otherwise people mostly try to put on their best face, their best appearance. You know, I'm going out in public, I have to put on this and that, and I have to put my overcoat, button it up tight. Well, you can't, if you're going with Parkinson's and you can't button it, you're revealed, you know, there's no way about it. What happens to me when my feet feel like glue and they're stuck on the floor, I sometimes cannot walk, but I can dance. If I can, I don't know, I can give you an example. Should I start?
Yeah.
Well, for example, right now I'm off. You can see my hand is shaking. I have the tremor. And if I try to walk, I have a great deal of difficulty. I could walk a little bit, but if I pretend I'm dancing, I could go. And I don't have any problems. The music leads. In other words, it's not my brain telling me to take a step or to do this or do that. The music is leading me. So I'm like following this wonderful leader who's so mysterious and has such a lovely sound, and it's going to take me to some other place.
What is that other place?
Well, well, excuse me, it's a place where you're weightless. You know, your body is just flies. It doesn't tug at you, tug you and pull you and push you and, you know, have you in these knots where you can't move and you can't think and you're struggling and fighting. It just, you know, you go above that.
Thank you all so much. I am excited to hear your questions, comments. Feel free to raise your hand and share them verbally, or if you're more comfortable putting them in chat, that is also, I think that's okay. I haven't checked with the presenters here, but I know some people are a little shyer than others, so feel free to do whatever feels comfortable for you. But we have about 18 minutes to dive into your inquiry. And I guess one question for you, why is Cindy able to do that? That's your research task. I don't know the answer.
Thank you so much, David, for taking the time to share with us for your career, insight, and perspectives on a fascinating discussion around neuroscience and dance. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.